bourgeoisie produces, above all, art zone. Grave diggers.
Hey everyone.
Hey folks, how's it going?
Welcome to another episode of Das Criminal Podcast.
Yeah, another one in our series about the Arab Spring, so strap in for a new day, a new country.
Yeah, I'm excited. Our podcasting software just updated and now includes video, and we're not using it, but Amr got a glimpse of me this morning.
Yeah, the new interface looks really nice. Erin looks like Erin. Confirmed, she is the other person. I think the videos are great because now you know that the other person is not like a Fed or something.
I am wearing my pajamas. I always wear these pajamas when we record. They are a peach, which is a Korean telecommunications mascot.
Yeah, they look quite adorable, but then again, everything in Korea has a weird, adorable sense to it.
I'm not sure if you guys can hear, but someone in my building, I think in the apartment beneath me, is like drilling. There's sort of a loud construction noise. I'm sorry, there's just nothing I can do. I don't speak Korean.
Yeah, I can't hear it on my end, so if I can't hear it, I hope it's not being recorded.
Yeah, I've mentioned it before, but my fridge is loud too, so sometimes there's just ambient background buzzing here. I'm sorry about that.
Just a heads up, everyone, I am officially in remission.
Woohoo!
Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. My hair is growing back too, so that's important. It's a lot softer than it used to be, which I'm curious about once it gets longer.
Ooh.
My beard has fully grown back, like fully. I should go for regular follow-ups every couple of months, but as of last weekend, I am in remission.
It's now Amr 1, Cancer 0.
Yeah, well, I would say Armor 3, Cancer 0, because I had 3 rounds of chemo. So, yeah, I think I scored a hat trick on the tumor.
True. Well, we are so happy that you are healthy.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I couldn't have done it without the support of all of my friends. Love you all. Erin, you've been great. Very understanding. Our listeners, I think, have been also very understanding with the change in podcast schedule. Sometimes I wasn't there. So yeah, thanks everyone.
What wonderful news to start off.
Yeah.
It only goes downhill from here, everyone.
I was just about to say that. That's about the only happy news we have. So we decided to start the episode with the dessert and then devolve to the plate of shit that you're about to eat.
Yes, the cheese board before dinner.
Yep. So without further ado, on January 27th, 2011, the people of Yemen followed the example set by Tunisia and Egypt, no other countries at this point, and flooded the streets demonstrating against the incumbent regime of Ali Abdullah Saleh. Much like other countries experiencing revolution, Yemenis were tired of endemic unemployment, mass immiseration, and no prospects for improvement. But after months of protests and in some cases armed encounters between revolutionaries and the government, the people finally felled Saleh on November 23, 2011. An election was organized for February 2012, and Vice President Abrabbuh Mansur Hadi, Abrabbuh, I believe, which is a weird name, but I believe is common in Yemen. Abrabbuh Mansur Hadi took power as interim president. What appeared to be a spring, however, was a false dawn as the post-Saleh era deteriorated rapidly into a brutal civil war that remains ongoing. But how did we get to the current crisis in Yemen? So before we get into it, I want to get into the history of Yemen because the history is very important to understand what's going on right now. After the end of World War I, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire left a sort of power vacuum in the Middle East. And as per Sykes-Picot, most of the Middle East became the spoils of war for the British Empire and the French. Northwestern Yemen, however, emerged independent as the Mutawakkilite Kingdom of Yemen, whereas the south of the country around the port of Aden was seized by the British Empire and became a protectorate. This sort of treatment by the British and the French of the Middle East as a whole led to widespread resentment and anti-colonial sentiment across the region. And in the early and mid-20th century, these sentiments coalesced around a secular pan-Arabist ideology. In the 1950s and 60s, tensions exploded. military officers embracing pan-Arabism and disenchanted with sclerotic Arab monarchies overthrew the kings across the region.
I know someone whose grandfather was a Yemeni king, and interestingly enough, someone else that we know's grandfather overthrew him, and they're surprisingly cool about it now.
Wait, do they know each other or do you know both of them? Like, do they also know each other?
They know each other, yeah.
Oh, that's fucking cool. No hard feelings, mate. Have a beer, have a beer. Cheers, pal. I feel like I'd want to be descended from the people that overthrew the king than the king, personally.
My grandfather was homeless and lived in his car, so...
Yeah, mine was probably some peasant or fisherman in Bahrain, so...
Yeah, I probably come from like a long line of animal herders and shit shovelers. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, very, very Monty Python Life of Brian there. Yeah, so the Kingdom of Yemen was no exception to this, and in 1962, a cadre of revolutionary officers overthrew King Muhammad al-Badr and plunged North Yemen into a civil war. On the one hand, those revolutionary officers established the Yemeni Arab Republic, the YAR, also known as North Yemen, and I'm going to refer to it as North Yemen for the most part of this episode. And they espoused a pan-Arabist ideology that gained them the support of Jamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt and the Soviet Union. On the other hand, the royalists, backing the deposed king, fought to restore the monarchy with the support of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Britain. But these royalists were ultimately defeated, resulting in the perseverance of the newly established YAR. Meanwhile, the British Protectorate of South Yemen achieved independence in 1967 as the People's Republic of Yemen following a guerrilla campaign by the National Liberation Front. In 1969, factional conflicts within the NLF led to the establishment of the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, colloquially now known as South Yemen, which is what I'm going to refer to it from now on, which became a one-party Marxist-Leninist state and now also gained the support of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc.
If you look at a map, North and South Yemen really look like West and East Yemen, respectively. The easiest way for me personally to look at them is their capital cities. North Yemen's Sana'a is north of South Yemen's Aden.
Yeah, if you look at a map, that's pretty much how it goes. So relations between North and South Yemen oscillated between friendly and hostile, including two civil wars in 1972 and 1979. In both cases, North Yemen, the YAR, was supported by Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the US, and the UK against the communist Marxist-Leninist South Yemen and Soviet allies. And just to clarify, I know that earlier I said the Soviet Union supported the YAR as in North Yemen, but they were supporting them against the monarchists, like the people who wanted to put the king back in power. But once, and this happened later on in the decade of the 60s, once the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen was established in the south, the Soviet Union shifted its support to this Marxist-Leninist state. With the Soviet Union, however, declining in the 80s and on the verge of collapse, South Yemen lost its strongest ally. As a result, on May 22, 1990, South and North Yemen formally united as the Republic of Yemen under the presidency of North Yemen President Ali Abdullah Saleh. And Saleh has been in power ever since, up until 2011.
The split and then unification of Yemen is crucial to understanding the 2011 protests. First, most of Yemen's resources come from oil fields, fisheries, and ports in the south, but end up going towards things like infrastructure projects in the capital, Sana'a. This leads some in South Yemen to believe that the government favors what was formerly North Yemen. Saleh's government was happy to frame any protests in the south as being separatist in nature, even if this wasn't necessarily the case. In 1994, the two areas fought a post-unification civil war, and Saleh has used this as a way to frame any calls for reform in South Yemen as nationalist agitation.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand this division to understand what's going to happen next. But it's also important to see why Yemenis were upset with Ali Abdullah Saleh beyond just the sort of north and south divide, because even northern Yemenis there was a lot of discontent against Saleh's government. Of course, the reasons for this are similar to other Arab countries that experienced the Arab Spring, via joblessness, economic decline, Saleh's attempts to modify the constitution, and just general immiseration amongst the people.
Plus, there was political repression and underrepresentation in the country, and Yemenis had really been protesting against Saleh for years, particularly since 2007.
Yeah, Yemen, even in the best of times, wasn't a particularly wealthy nation. It didn't have the amount of oil Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or Kuwait had. And it was never a center in the Arab world the same way Syria and Egypt were. So when post-recession and, with general corruption and political repression running rampant, it's no surprise that Yemenis were experiencing particular immiseration leading up to 2011. On the 27th of January, 16,000 people demonstrated against Saleh and the capital of Sana'a. Saleh, of course, promises not to run in 2013 elections or hand power to his sons, but the protests continue. On the 3rd of February, what happened was called a Day of Rage, in which protests in Sana'a, Aden, and elsewhere erupted against Saleh again, as part of the Arab Spring wave.
Yemenis borrow from other activists in the Arab Spring using phrases like the youth movement and the people want the downfall of the regime.
Which in Arabic translates to الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, which I think is a phrase rules.
Yeah.
So, and also nizam, which refers to regime, also means the order or the government or the state or the system. So, it's a rather broad term. Of course, this is really interesting in Yemen because unlike other states, pro-Saleh counter-protests assemble in Sana'a from the beginning. Security forces use live ammo on protesters, causing several dozen deaths among them, which, as we saw from previous episodes of the Arab Spring, is par on course for autocrats who really don't want to change the system. In February, daily protests occur as Saleh refuses to step down, and several large tribes commit to the opposition. And I think it's very important to understand that Yemen is a particularly tribal society. And I don't say this from a sort of Orientalist perspective, but just a sort of an observatory fact. Yemen doesn't have the sort of national identity that coalesced in other Arab countries, which is not, again, I'm trying not to be Orientalist, but tribal allegiance in Yemen is very, very strong and very, very important. And trying to negotiate political power between those tribes has been the role of the government for quite a while. And with several large tribes committing to the opposition, the rallies against the government swell to over 100,000 plus members almost every day. And of course, the tribes are also armed, creating a very volatile situation.
I'm going to read a quote from the Irish journalist Patrick Cockburn. Quote, "Yemen has always been a dangerous place. Wonderfully beautiful, the mountainous north of the country is a guerrilla paradise. The Yemenis are exceptionally hospitable, though this has its limits. Almost everybody has a gun, usually at least an AK-47 assault rifle, but tribesmen often own heavier armament." End quote.
Yeah, that quote reminds me of an encounter I had in Marrakesh. I was staying at this hostel when I was backpacking across Morocco, and I met this older Yemeni bloke who was in Morocco with a business plan to open up his own hostel. So we got to chatting, and, because we're both Arab and we spoke in Arabic, and he was telling me how in his youth in Yemen, for example, he was telling me how, you'd go to this convenience store, the bodega, and there'd be like, veggies, meat, etc., and then there'd be a rack of AK-47s and other rifles that you could just buy at your local convenience store. And he was also telling me another story of growing up in Yemen, where as kids, he was out with his friends and they were throwing rocks to see who could throw rocks the farthest. And it was getting dark because it was nightfall. And so one of his friends was like, "Wait, I have an idea." And he comes back with a crate of grenades because they couldn't see where the rocks were landing, but you could definitely see where the grenades are landing.
Wow.
Yeah, a very, very volatile country in the best of times.
I know people who were born in Yemen or in Ethiopia and have basically gone back and forth between the two countries on rickety little boats, usually as refugees, multiple times. Like things get too dangerous in Yemen, they go across the Gulf of Aden to Ethiopia. Things get too dangerous in Ethiopia, they go back to Yemen, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that region in particular is very unstable, for lack of a better word. And that's not to blame the people there. There's a lot of foreign intervention making it unstable. But if you look at Yemen, if you look at Somalia, a lot of, fractured countries with a lot of factions vying for support.
Yeah, no, I know lovely, lovely people from Yemen. They say Geem, too, as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're Geem sayers.
Yeah, I don't remember if the Yemeni guy I met said that or not. I think he did. Yeah, he was a nice bloke.
I suppose, though, in North Africa, you wouldn't necessarily attribute that to being from Yemen. But yeah, the Yemenis I know say Gim.
Yeah. Yeah, because he got refugee status as an asylum seeker in Germany and stayed in Germany for a while, but then moved to Morocco to start a business. He was a nice guy. I mean, he was conservative Muslim, but he was a nice guy aside from that. So on the 2nd of March, the opposition presents Saleh with a roadmap to resign peacefully, where they promise Saleh with political immunity as part of its transition, but Saleh refuses. As March progresses, multiple government officials resign and military officers defect to the opposition. At this point, about 6 of Yemen's 18 governorates, 6 of the 18 are no longer in government control. In April, the Gulf Cooperation Council, composed of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE, offered to mediate between the opposition and Saleh seesaws between accepting the GCC deals and not. And several attempts to mediate fail as Saleh comes close to signing a deal but then withdraws his support.
My theory is that during this time, Saleh was trying to negotiate outside support from powers like the United States. WikiLeaks cables show that even prior to the 2011 uprising, he was aware of dissent within his own government and reaching out to Western powers for more counter-terror support. Of course, Saleh's not the only leader to try and purge his own government with money pledged to hunting down terrorists.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was being way too naive in expecting better deals than the one that were being offered, in which he would get immunity and get to leave the country peacefully. I think he misread the situation also. I feel like if this all happened during the Trump presidency, he would have definitely gotten a lot of support from Trump. But under Obama was not willing to, throw his entire support behind someone like Saleh.
WikiLeaks cables do show that Saleh was reaching out to the US asking for support, and meanwhile the US was telling Saudi, get rid of him.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they saw him as a liability. So on the 23rd of May, and this has been going on for a while, unlike the other Arab Springs, this has been quite the progression. And on the 23rd of May, Sheikh Sadiq al-Ahmar, who is the leader of the Hashid Tribal Confederation, one of the most powerful and populous tribes in the country, declares his support for the opposition, triggering an armed conflict between tribe members and security, especially in the capital Sana'a, where clashes were brutal. Just like the Patrick Coburn quote you mentioned earlier, Aaron, everyone has an AK-47, but the tribes often have their own heavy armament. So there were credible reports of heavy artillery fire and bombs exchanged between the tribes and the government forces. Al-Ahmar, however, issues a ceasefire 4 days later on May 27th, and a temporary truce is signed on May 28th as different factions try to negotiate a compromise. And on June 1st, this ceasefire, however short it was broken by the Presidential Guard units led by Saleh's son Ahmed, with intense shelling of tribal positions in Sana'a, the Hashid tribe position in Sana'a. This led to 45 people killed and hundreds injured as government forces' attempts to retake the buildings that they've lost to the tribes completely fail. On the 3rd of June, a bomb planted in the presidential palace injures Saleh severely and kills others. Initially, the reports were trying to hide how injured Saleh was, saying that his neck was injured and a couple of bones, but apparently 40% of his body was covered in severe burns. Saleh was taken to Saudi Arabia for treatment, and Vice President Abrabbuh Mansur Hadi takes interim control. During June and July, truces between the opposition and government pop up and then are immediately interrupted by sporadic fighting, so there's no consistent period of peace or negotiation. But on the 6th of July, the opposition presents the government with another deal, with the offer of transferring power to the Transition Council before democratic elections. But the government rejects this offer. The opposition, in response, formed the Joint Parties Movement, which is a sort of umbrella of the various factions within the opposition.
The Joint Parties Movement encompasses everything from Al-Islah, which is an Islamist party, to the Socialists. This is part of the problem with categorizing an uprising as a strict regime versus opposition dichotomy, which we see far too often in analyses of the 2010 and 2011 protests in North Africa and the Middle East. Yes, all of these people oppose the Saleh government for one reason or another, and are forced by circumstances to unite as one political opposition bloc. But that doesn't mean their ideologies, demands, or visions for Yemen's future have much in common.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfectly put. And as we're going to see in the next episode with Yemen, having an opposition bloc doesn't necessarily preclude the possibility of the factions within the opposition trying to cannibalize each other as soon as they, seize power. Just because they have a common enemy now, it doesn't mean they're going to turn on each other as soon as that common enemy is deposed.
Right. And it brings up questions, of course, about political strategy. I'm opposed to the Democrats in the United States because of their neoliberalism. But am I going to unite with Trump conservatives? Hell no.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is definitely something to be said about making cautious alliances with people who you think broadly you can cooperate with. Like, I'll happily work with someone like, say, Ro Khanna in, his attempt to end the war in Yemen and withdraw US support from the war in Yemen. I wholeheartedly support someone like Bernie Sanders, but someone like Ro Khanna or people like that who I may have issues with in like nitpicking, but overall, I'll try and work with them to find common goals. But again, there's a limit to that. I wouldn't try and support Hillary Clinton, for example, or organize or cooperate with Hillary Clinton, because at that point, there is just not enough in common for me to cooperate.
Let's give our Molotov-Ribbentrop takes and get our podcast canceled.
Ooh, do you want to do that?
No. No, absolutely not. But I think there's also a difference between like allying with a powerful political group and then sort of allying with other small parties in opposition to the group in power.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. And of course, there's some difference between different factions within a country allying and different countries or allying with a greater power, like a greater country. And the balance of power, shifts between these situations. Like, I also am cognizant that as a socialist, as a leftist, aligning with the Democratic Party is a double-edged sword because the Democratic Party just holds way too much power in the US political scene that they're much more capable of absorbing socialists and shutting them down than the socialists are in seizing the party and directing it in their favor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we have Democratic majorities in the New York House and Senate, plus a Democratic governor, Cuomo, and New York State is not a socialist utopia.
Yeah, exactly. I understand, the Islamists organizing with sort of pan-Arabists and socialists, but as we'll see, this deteriorates very quickly after. The violence escalates as opposition tribesmen exchange fire with soldiers loyal to Saleh throughout the summer into September. On the 23rd of September, Saleh returns from Saudi after getting treatment and flies into Sana'a, but the government at this point only controls Sana'a and small spots within the country, as large swathes of the area fall to either independent tribesmen, the opposition parties, or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is particularly active.
There are some theories as well that Saleh basically let parts of the country fall to Al-Qaeda to try to delay the opposition gaining power.
Yeah, I mean, it is a strategy we've seen over and over again in the region where Al-Qaeda or other Islamists are used as a cudgel against some opposition parties, both in terms of using them as a sort of muscle to affect direct violence on other opposition factions, or indirectly as a sort of reason to obtain support and arms from external governments like Saudi Arabia or the US or what have you. They can point at Al-Qaeda and see that's the opposition. The opposition is Al-Qaeda. You need to support me against these people.
Yeah, for sure.
So on the 23rd of November, having oscillated between signing the deal and not signing the deal and, hesitating, Saleh finally flies to Riyadh and signs the GCC-mediated deal, which hands over power to his vice president Hadi on an interim basis in anticipation of elections on the 21st of February 2012. The deal also offers Saleh and his family, and this is important because his sons were high-level operatives within the government, like the security forces, immunity from prosecution. The deal is ratified by Yemen's assembly on January 21st, 2012.
Now, we really need you to picture Saleh getting on that plane to Riyadh to sign the deal and giving an evil smirk and saying, "You haven't seen the last of me."
Oh, yeah. On the 21st of February, elections are held as promised, and Hadi wins after announcing his candidacy when he was interim president, he announced his candidacy to run during the elections, and he wins 99.8% of the votes with 65% turnout.
Wee-oo, fraud.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's red flags because there's definitely direct rigging going on, but also the turnout itself is particularly low. I mean, 65% is particularly low because the deal that was signed, the transitory deal by the GCC that was signed, was rejected out of hand by Houthis and other tribes in both the north and the south. So their members just didn't vote because they refused the deal. Part of the deal is also that Hadi is going to serve only 2 years to oversee the writing of a constitution, and then he's prohibited from running in the next elections, which are supposed to happen in 2014. So we reach the end of the first phase of this revolution in which Hadi is governing a very fractured country. There are various factions who just don't recognize his authority. And Yemen, which was hardly unified at the best of times, now devolved into tribal confederations with a very, very minimal central authority in Sana'a. And, poverty and economic immiseration remains running rampant. There is no economic healing anytime soon.
What's interesting is that up until this point, and we're going to have another episode on Yemen next week, so as you know, the story is not finished, but up until this point, Yemen is basically hailed as a victory. Superficial one at that, but Saleh has been removed, and the GCC sort of pats itself on the back and says, "We did it, we saved the city."
Yeah, it's clear with hindsight that the entire country was set up to fail. But at the time, everyone thought it was medals for everyone, mission accomplished, bring out the banners. It was very naive, from the GCC, either naive or outright malicious. First of all, the deal did not gain the acceptance of the Houthis, who are a major power player in the country. With Al-Qaeda running rampant, there was clearly going to be more violence, and without a central state to push back on them, it was just going to devolve into a fractal war.
And the problems which started the uprisings to begin with, that poverty and unemployment, were not addressed. So even the underlying causes are still there.
Yeah, exactly. Hadi, who wins the elections, he was vice president to Saleh. It wasn't like, new faces, fresh faces. It's just a carousel or a revolving door of the ancien regime, the old guard just replacing themselves, basically.
And even Saleh's sons who were in the government, I think his son was in command of the Republican Guard, nothing happened to them. They're still there.
Yeah, basically. When the US invaded Iraq, right, and they overthrew Saddam, and their idea of de-Baathification was firing everyone with a Ba'ath party card, like Ba'ath membership, which involved everyone from General Izzat Ibrahim ad-Duri to the guy who runs the museum curator or whatever, because everyone had to be part of the party to be working in the public sector. And, once you fire everyone and prohibit them from holding jobs, then there's going to be a very pissed off public in a country that you're trying to rebuild, or ostensibly trying to rebuild at least. Which is all to say that I don't believe in punishing everyone for a particular regime's corruption or whatnot. But at the same time, letting Saleh's sons run roughshod without any sort of justice being brought forth, not prosecuting at least the upper echelons of the old guard or the party in power, the incumbent, just leaves the door open for counter-revolutionary forces to come back.
Well, I'd also argue, too, that this sort of facade of a transition and then signing this deal with the GCC actually legitimizes the government even more. It makes a bad government stronger in an international sort of way.
Oh, yeah. It gains international recognition, and it ensures that countries like Saudi Arabia are now invested in the success of this post-deal government, which means that anyone who can point out that, oh, this is not a good government, now you're facing a government with the support of foreign backers.
So next week, we are going to get into Yemen's civil war. And then, as we've said, we will round out our Arab uprising series with Syria.
Yeah, the big controversial one. We're leaving the juicy bits for last.
If you like our content, you can subscribe to us on Patreon for extra content. We just put up an episode on the Port Said massacre in Egypt, and because I put it up really late and I was sleepy, I put it up to everyone. So normally our $10 and up patrons get our bonus episodes, but everyone gets that one for now.
Yeah, it's in the spirit of President's Day, or Family Day here in Ontario.
Yes, we will never punish you for my sleepy mistakes.
Yeah, so enjoy the episode. It is a very depressing episode, but it's a good one, I think.
We also have some good upcoming content. We have our review of A Bug's Life. And also, we're going to do an episode on how we make the podcast, because a lot of people have asked us, like, how we record, how we do our notes, how we put things up. So from start to finish, we're going to show you exactly what we did, like from coming up with the ideas to how we record, to how we edit, to how we post.
Yeah, it's going to be a good how it's done for people. So hope you all enjoyed this week. Be safe. If you are in America or parts of Canada, take care with the snowstorm happening. It is very cold out. Please take good care of yourselves and rest warmly and stay safe out there, everyone.
We love you very much, and we appreciate all your support, especially as Amr was dealing with health issues and is now better. Oh my gosh, so happy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Love you all. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.